5 treaties, 43 years of peace in Europe. 4 to undo all of it. Professor Adeyemi is at the desk for this one. She reads alliance treaties the way most people read a lease, clause by clause. In 1890, Berlin let one secret treaty quietly expire. That non-decision decided which side everyone ended up on.
I'm Nora, and the picture I keep going back to is a funeral. May 1910. Edward VII of Britain is dead, and the procession through London carries 9 reigning sovereigns behind one coffin. Real film of it. Not a painting, not a reconstruction. White horses, plumed helmets, half the crowned heads of Europe on one London street.
Lewis here. Watch the man in the center.
Here's the group portrait they sat for at Windsor afterwards. 9 sovereigns, 1 frame. George V seated in the middle, standing behind his left shoulder, that mustache. Wilhelm II of Germany.
Can I ask what you assumed when you first saw it? Because most of them are related. George and Wilhelm are first cousins. The Tsar is a first cousin to George and married to another of Victoria's granddaughters. The temptation is to read that photograph as a family and conclude a family can't go to war with itself.
4 years later, 3 of those men are at war.
The cousins weren't the wiring then, something else was. And that something was written down, signed and dated. Which is the part I find genuinely reassuring, because written things can be read.
5 core instruments, signed between 1879 and 1907. That's the machine. It was designed deliberately by people who thought they were preventing exactly the war they got.
The honest starting point is this. Nobody in that photograph wanted 1914. The system they built to avoid it is what carried them into it. That isn't the same as saying it was inevitable.
The studio chat keeps pushing one thing up at me, and I can't get past it. Why did Europe end up in 2 armed camps at all? Because it didn't start that way.
It started as one camp with a switchboard in the middle of it.
Everything you've seen so far is the machine working. Stick with me, because what's coming is the 4 years where one piece of it lapsed and the whole thing rewired into the shape that killed a generation. Back to the man who built it. Before we keep going, one small favor that actually moves the needle. If this is landing for you, tap like, then subscribe and turn on the bell so you do not miss the rest. 2 taps, completely free, and it pushes this in front of more people who need it.
(1871). Germany is 3 weeks old and already has a permanent enemy.
France, beaten and stripped of Alsace and Lorraine. How long does that grievance last?
Forever, near enough. So Bismarck's problem isn't France. It's France plus anybody.
Wrong instinct, most people. They assume he wanted allies. He wanted dependence. His own words, if anyone wants to check. Kissing dictation, the 15th of June, 1877. A French paper had called him a man with the nightmare of coalitions. He quotes it about himself and agrees.
Think of it like a board where one player never moves a piece. He just makes sure everybody has to ask him first.
The dictation says it plainly. A situation in which every power except France needs us.
Not a coalition, a switchboard.
The Berlin Switchboard. I'm keeping that.
How does a man wire a continent? September 1873, the 3 emperors lead.
Russia, Germany, Austria, Hungary. 3 monarchs agreeing to consult each other before anybody moves.
It holds until the Balkans, where every one of these things goes to die.
Harder one next, 7th of October, 1879, secret.
The dual alliance. If Russia attacks Austria-Hungary, Germany fights. That's a real commitment, in writing. 3 years later, he adds Italy. 20th of May, 1882.
The Triple Alliance. Italy and Germany get military support if France attacks either of them unprovoked.
Notice who is named in that clause. Not Russia, France.
Louis, that's the bit people get wrong. Say it again slowly.
Because the whole design is one sentence and it is the move that wins the board. Keep Paris with nobody to call.
And the showpiece is 1878. Europe nearly goes to war over the Balkans, and the Congress that settles it sits in
Berlin. Obviously Berlin. He built the room he gets to host.
Berlin, yes, thank you. And he stands up in the Reichstag in February and calls himself the honest Brucker. Werner painted it. That's the room. Bismarck mid-canvas with his hand out. Ottoman delegates in fezzes at the edge, and everybody's business getting done in his capital.
Honest Brucker. He is hosting the conference, drafting the compromise, and quietly collecting what everybody will owe him afterwards.
The third one isn't brokering.
It's if you write the invoice yourself.
The Congress runs from June to July. Austria gets Bosnia to administer. Russia gets less than it won on the battlefield and remembers that.
Which leaves Bismarck holding two promises that point in opposite directions, and 9 years later he writes them both down in the same decade. One treaty, 3 years, two contradictory guarantees.
Professor Adeyemi is back with us for this one, and she's read the text of the 1887 treaty. Is it a normal document, or is it doing something a treaty isn't supposed to do?
It's doing something a treaty isn't supposed to do, and on purpose. Signed the 18th of June, 1887, 3-year term Germany and Russia.
And Germany is already bound by a different treaty that points the other way entirely.
Walk me through the actual clause. This is the piece I had to read 3 times.
Article 1, if one party finds itself at war with a third great power, the other maintains benevolent neutrality. That is the whole engine. Germany and Russia promise to stay out of each other's wars.
Careful though, there are carve-outs, and the carve-outs are where it lives.
2 of them, and they're the tell. Neutrality doesn't apply if Germany attacks France, and it doesn't apply if Russia attacks Austria-Hungary. The aggressor gets nothing. Only the attacked party is covered.
What did Berlin already owe Vienna in 1879?
Military assistance against a Russian attack, which is the collision. In 1879, Berlin promised Vienna it would fight Russia. In 1887, it promised St. Petersburg it would stand aside.
And the way those two fit together is that they only both stay true as long as nobody
shoots first. Stop there, that's my lane. It runs on sequence. Both promises stay alive as long as nobody asks who moved first, because Berlin owes Vienna only against an attack, and owes Russia only if Russia is attacked. So if nobody is ever the aggressor, Germany never has to choose. It's a contradiction with a timer on it. 2 circles then. 2 promises, 1 signature holding both.
One circle is the 1879 obligation to Vienna. The other is the 1887 obligation to St. Petersburg. Neither one is dishonest on its own. The overlap is the problem, and only one government could see the whole of it.
Because Vienna didn't know the second one existed. That's the part.
There is a further layer, a very secret additional protocol attached to the same treaty. Germany pledged benevolent neutrality and moral and diplomatic support if Russia had to defend the entrance to the Black Sea, plus backing for a regular and legal government in Bulgaria.
The Straits and the Bulgarian succession. 2 things Britain cared about as much as Russia did.
which is a live wire, and it comes back. Don't lose that thread, because in a few minutes Germany will be trying to make friends with the one power that protocol was quietly pointed at.
Here's my honest problem with all of it. This works. That's what makes it frightening.
It works for as long as one person can hold every string and knows which to pull. That isn't a system, it's a skill with a 3-year renewal date on it.
A renewal date. That word is the hinge of this whole story, because the man whose skill the machine depended on was about to lose his job 3 weeks before it came due. March 1890.
(1888). Germany has 3 emperors in 1 year.
Wilhelm I dies in March, at 90. His son Frederick III is already dying of throat cancer and reigns barely 3 months. And on the 15th of June, the throne goes to a grandson of 29.
That's him, Wilhelm II, in the portrait everybody knows.
Careful here though, the easy version of this story is a bad emperor and a good chancellor, and that isn't what the record says.
The record says something worse. It says the office allowed it.
The scholarship is blunt about the structure. Wilhelm established a system of personal monarchy in which he, his courtiers, and his military entourage determined policy. That's a constitutional fact, not a personality note.
Picture the switchboard now. One operator, 29 years old, and no wiring diagram anywhere else in the building.
Bismarck is 73 and has held the panel alone since before this man was born.
March 1890, he is out. And Punch, in London, runs the cartoon that outlived every treaty in this episode. Tenniel drew it for the 29th of March. The old pilot in a peacoat walking down the ship's ladder. The young emperor at the rail, crowned, watching him go. Nobody at the wheel in the frame at all.
Weeks later, the treaty comes up for renewal, and Berlin lets it lapse.
Now the version most people carry is that this was carelessness. A young emperor, a new chancellor, nobody minding the
Nobody read it. They dropped it because nobody understood what it did.
That's the version, and it's wrong. They understood it exactly. Somebody sat down and wrote out why, and the memo survives. Louis, you've got the text open. Read me the actual line because a paraphrase will not do here.
Count von Berchem, Under-Secretary at the Foreign Office, 25th of March, 1890, quote, "The agreement stands in opposition to the Triple Alliance, if not in letter, then in spirit."
Okay, so, hang on. Let me lay his reasons out in order, because there are 4 and every one of them is serious. 1. It contradicts the Triple Alliance in spirit. 2. It makes Germany deny Austria support in the opening round of a war it is separately sworn to fight. 3. All its advantages run to Russia. And 4. It hands St. Petersburg a document.
The fourth one is the sharpest.
His phrase is a document with which they can disrupt our relations at any time. With Austria, Italy, England, and the Porte. 4 capitals, 1 piece of paper, and Russia holding the only copy Berlin could not explain away.
So it's a blackmail note that Germany wrote about itself and handed to a rival. Those men weren't fools. They were choosing honesty and simplicity over a juggling act.
Fine. So were they right?
They were correct that the treaty was two-faced, correct that Russia could weaponize it, and correct that it gave more than it got.
Sure. But was letting it lapse the correct call?
No, the two-facedness was the piece.
Say why, because that is the sentence the whole episode turns on. Take away the thing they were embarrassed by, and you have not fixed a flaw. You have removed the only wire holding St. Petersburg to Berlin, and there was no second wire anywhere in any drawer in that building.
And I want to push on that, because you're treating this as though Russia had somewhere else to go, and for 2 years it genuinely didn't. Nobody in Europe would sign with a republic until until 1892, when the 2 governments with the least in common in Europe sat down and signed a military convention, a republic and an autocracy, Paris and St. Petersburg.
On paper, that pairing should be impossible. France had executed a king within living memory. Russia's whole legitimacy was that you don't do that.
Isolation is a solvent. It dissolves principles faster than anything else in diplomacy.
So here's the expiry I owed you at the top. That treaty Berlin let run out in 1890 was the only thing standing between France and a Russian signature. 2 years later, the signature exists. That's the unlock, but the cost isn't the alliance. It's one clause buried in the middle of it, and that clause is what makes 1914 move as fast as it does.
Article 1 first. Read it as written.
If France is attacked by Germany, or by Italy supported by Germany, Russia shall employ all her available forces to attack Germany. And it runs the other way as well, word for word, which is the bit people forget. Article 3 puts numbers on it, and the numbers are the part that stops you. France commits 1,300,000 men. Russia 700,000 to 800,000.
Written in 1892. Not mobilized, not raised. Promised in advance, in a signed document, 22 years before anybody fired. And here's the model I had in my head for years. 2 countries promise to help each other if attacked. That's what a defensive alliance is, and it should make war less likely, because attacking either one now costs you both.
Right about Article 1. Wrong about the document. Because Article 2 isn't about being attacked
At all? Then what does it fire on?
mobilization, not attack.
If any Triple Alliance power mobilizes, France and Russia mobilize. And the text says at the first news of this event, and without previous agreement being necessary.
Read that last bit again. Without previous agreement being necessary.
No cabinet meets, no ambassador is consulted. It isn't a promise to decide together, it's a promise to have already decided.
Think of it like a toll road with automatic gantries. The convention is the road, the sensor on the gantry is any Triple Alliance mobilization, and the toll charged is full national mobilization, both countries at once. 3 mappings, and every one of them holds.
Okay, but a toll road still bills the person who drove under the gantry. Who is driving here? And that's where the analogy breaks, isn't it? On a real toll road you only pay if you chose to drive. Here somebody else's car trips the sensor and your account gets charged.
Exactly, and that's the rule in plain words. After 1892, a mobilization order anywhere in the Triple Alliance obliges France and Russia to mobilize, without either government having to agree to it first. I laminate the family calendar so nobody has to ask me. Convenient for a school run. Catastrophic as a war plan. Because the whole point of laminating it is that nobody stops to reread it.
There's one more line and it changes what we've been saying. The Avalon text is explicit that the trigger is any one of the powers belonging to the Triple Alliance. Any one, not Germany.
Any one of them. Then Italy or Austria-Hungary alone could start the clock in Paris.
Italy or Austria-Hungary alone.
Then I was answering the wrong question a minute ago. I've been calling this a Franco-German trigger. It isn't. It's a Vienna trigger with a French bill attached.
Then test it, Lewis. Change one condition. Suppose in some future crisis Vienna mobilizes against a Balkan neighbor and Germany does nothing at all. What happens in Paris?
France mobilizes against Germany over an argument in the Balkans that France has no interest in, because the text doesn't ask France to be interested.
You're right about the mechanism, and I gave you the toll road too cheaply. So here's the sharper question. If the trigger is that automatic, why did it not fire in 1905, or 08, or 11? All 3 of those crises came close.
Because nobody mobilized. That's the whole answer, and it's the thin thread the next 20 years hang from. The machinery was armed from 1892. It just wasn't tripped.
4th of January, 1894. The staff agreement gains the status of an alliance treaty. Governments, not just generals.
Germany's own answer to the two-front problem this creates has an entire episode of its own, the Schlieffen Plan, so we will leave it there.
Bismarck's nightmare is now a signed treaty with a troop count on it. And instead of trying to prize it apart, Berlin spent the next decade picking a fight with the one country that had stayed out of everybody's alliances, over ships.
Professor Adiemi is still with us, and she was making the point in the break that the ships were never really about the ships.
They were about status. In 1897, the Foreign Secretary Bernhard von Bülow tells the Reichstag that Germany wants to put no one in the shade, but also demands its place in the sun. That is a claim about rank, not about naval strategy.
I'd push back on one thing before we go on, because I've heard that line attributed to the Kaiser my whole life.
It was Bülow in the Reichstag record. The Kaiser gets the credit because it sounds like him, which is its own comment on the reign.
Then the Navy Bills, 1898 and 1900.
And the design intent is on the record, which is what makes it damning. The fleet was to be a geopolitical lever, to coerce Britain into accepting Germany's bid for equality as a global empire. That is the scholarship's own phrasing.
Tirpitz, the man who built it.
And this is the man he built it for. Real film shot sometime in the 1910s. Watch him work the line, greeting each official in turn, an emperor doing the one job the Constitution let him do without asking anybody.
No cabinet in that shot, no chancellor. That's the whole system in 14 seconds. A fleet is steel, steel is coal. Watch the numbers. German steel output passed Britain's in about 1893 exactly. And by 1914, Germany is producing more than twice as much steel as Britain.
Put the pig iron up because that's the one that shows the shape of it.
1913, Germany, 19.3 million tons of pig iron. Britain, 10.4. And Germany was at about 1.6 million tons in 1871, the year the empire was founded.
42 years. From a fraction of Britain's output to nearly double it.
Stop the room for a second, because there's a version of this that overclaims and it's everywhere. Germany didn't overtake Britain in coal.
It didn't. Take 1913. The British figure is around 189 million tons of coal. The German figure about 153 million. Germany only closes that gap by adding roughly 92 million tons of lignite, which is a softer, weaker fuel.
The terrifying German number was never coal, steel.
And you can put a finger on the map where that steel came from. This is the Saar Valley, right on the French border. Vauclingen, Saarbrücken, St. Ingbert.
One small borderland, and by the period estimates something like 8% of the whole empire's coal came out of it, from pits largely owned by the Prussian and Bavarian governments. I want to flag that I couldn't reopen the original source on that figure today, so treat the 8% as approximate.
Same lesson I keep hitting writing up my village pub. The interesting history is never the building. It's who owned the ground under it.
Here the ground is coal, the owner is a government, and the government is building a fleet with it. That is the whole Weltpolitik argument compressed into one valley. State-owned pits, state-made steel, state-ordered battleships, and a bill nobody in the Reichstag could see the end of.
And this is the wire I asked you to keep hold of back in 1887. Berlin's secret protocol had quietly promised Russia support at the entrance to the Black Sea, which was Britain's oldest nervous spot in the world. Now Germany is building a battle fleet in the North Sea as well.
The own goal at the heart of the reign is exactly that. Bismarck's rule was that Germany must never make an enemy it doesn't need. Berlin managed to unsettle London twice in 2 different oceans for 2 unrelated reasons.
Britain answers in 1906. 1 ship, and everybody starts again.
HMS Dreadnought, 10 12-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, turbines, almost 21 knots sustained. She could fire 8 heavy guns in a broadside where contemporary battleships answered with 4.
The consequence is counterintuitive. By making every existing battleship obsolete, Britain reset its own enormous lead to 0. For 1 season, the naval race was genuinely open.
Germany closed it, which is why the fleet worked as a lever.
Germany didn't close it. That's the thing everybody expects, and the ledger refuses. By 1914, Britain has 29 dreadnought battleships and battlecruisers against Germany's 17. Count ships in service or under construction, and it's 45 to 26.
29 to 17. Then the money was the smallest part of what it cost.
The literature is blunter than that. The arms race was decided almost as soon as it started because Germany couldn't match British financial and industrial capacity. Berlin spent a fortune, frightened the one power it couldn't afford to frighten, and lost the race it started.
By 1912, the money moves back to the army. That is the moment the window opens on a land war instead.
Professor Adeyemi, thank you. The clause-by-clause read of that protocol is the thing I will actually keep from today.
Seconded, and specifically for making us say the coal number out loud instead of the flattering one.
Glad to help. Read the texts, not the summaries.
Wrong lever entirely.
A fleet built to buy respect, and it bought an enemy instead. That's where this one lands, and it's the last thing Berlin could afford.
Different animal entirely now. Everything so far has been continental. This next piece is an island deciding it can no longer stay one.
Britain had spent a century avoiding exactly this. No permanent alliances, no continental commitments. The phrase people used was splendid isolation, and it was a policy, not a mood.
Then on the 8th of April, 1904, Lansdowne and the French ambassador sign a declaration in London.
The Entente Cordiale. 3 years later, the Anglo-Russian Convention settles Britain's quarrels with Russia, signed the 31st of August, 1907, Persia, Afghanistan, and Tibet.
France, Russia, Britain. 3 powers, no gaps between them. The Triple Entente. Here is the thing I genuinely couldn't get straight in prep, so I am going to ask it badly. What did Britain promise to do if Germany attacked France?
I've got to fix the question before I can answer it because the question assumes a promise exists.
Britain promised nothing, no formal alliance, and therefore neither a casus foederis nor a military commitment. So the real question is not what Britain owed, it is what Britain would probably do, which is a completely different kind of thing.
Say the consequence out loud, because it's the biggest single fact in this episode.
Right up to 1914, nobody in Europe knew what Britain would do. Not Berlin, not Paris, not the British cabinet. The Triple Entente is 2 alliances and 1 very strong opinion.
Then put the 2 camps side by side. Triple Alliance first, a signed treaty from 1882 with a written casus foederis in it.
Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy, though nobody in Berlin trusted Italy by then.
Now the other side. France and Russia is a real treaty, same as theirs. Then Britain. No treaty at all, no casus foederis, and staff talks that oblige nobody to anything.
One camp was a contract. The other was a habit.
That's the trap, and its source. By 1912, both the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente had become established features of international relations. Established features, not because the paperwork matched, but because everybody had got used to arguing in that shape.
I hear you, Kim, but a habit doesn't survive 9 years on nothing. So what hardened them?
Crises. One after another, close enough together that nobody ever finished exhaling.
The 30th of March, 1905, the Imperial yacht makes a brief stop at Tangier and the Kaiser reads out a statement backing Moroccan independence straight across French plans.
Berlin's calculation was that France's new friend wouldn't show up, test the Entente early, break it cheap.
And the conference at Algeciras closes on the 6th of April 1906. The Paris, Madrid, and London trio prevails over the Berlin, Vienna, and Morocco trio. Germany walked into a room to prove it had friends and left having proved it had one.
Vienna, only Vienna. 1 friend out of 6 great powers. 5, if you are counting properly. Either way, 1.
Nora, take us to Bosnia because there's a trick played in the middle of it.
September 1908, Ehrenthal meets the Russian foreign minister at Buchlau in Moravia. He meets him at Buchlau, and Izvolsky recognizes Vienna's right to incorporate Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Ehrenthal doesn't tell him the date. On the 6th of October, the annexation is announced, and Izvolsky finds out that his private understanding has been used as cover.
Why did Russia not push back?
It couldn't. Over Bosnia, Russia was still broken from the drawback it suffered at the end of the war with Japan in 1905, so St. Petersburg swallowed the annexation and drew the conclusion every humiliated power draws, never again.
1911, Agadir. Berlin sends the gunboat Panther into the bay on the 1st of July, and this time the reaction is
Overblown. 1 small gunboat. Nobody sane thought a colonial gesture meant war.
Look at the ship. 2 funnels, a colonial gunboat, exactly as small as you say. And Britain read it as a bid for an Atlantic naval base, and effectively told Berlin it wouldn't be treated as a bystander. That's the year the naval race stopped being about ships and became about intentions.
Conceded. The size of the ship was never the signal.
And here's where it happened. Agadir sits on Morocco's Atlantic coast, well down the map from the Mediterranean, which is exactly why London twitched.
The honest broker would have written someone an invoice by now.
The honest broker had been dead for 13 years, and that isn't a joke. Nobody replaced the function.
Then 1912 and 13, Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, and Serbia go to war with the Ottoman Empire and win. Ottoman Europe collapses to a narrow band of territory in eastern Thrace, on a straight line from Enos to Mydia.
Serbia comes out of it nearly twice the size it went in. And Vienna, which is holding Bosnia and several million South Slavs, looks at that and doesn't see a neighbor. It sees a magnet.
A magnet, and you can measure what a magnet does to a general staff. Between January 1913 and June 1914, the Austro-Hungarian Chief of Staff demanded war on Serbia 24 times.
$1,300,000 men standing in peacetime. That's Russia in 1914, and it's the number Berlin couldn't stop looking at.
Run the rest of the table, because the relative sizes are the argument.
France, 850,000. Germany, 811,000. Austria-Hungary, 494,000.
So Germany is outnumbered by each of its two likely opponents separately, and its one reliable ally is the smallest army in the room. Germany had been growing too, 606,866 men in 1904 to 811,000 by 1914.
The men grew by a third. The money more than doubled, up 114%.
France had less population to work with, so in 1913 it changed the rules instead. Military service raised from 2 years to 3. That's how a smaller country buys 850,000 men.
Then in June 1914, Russia publishes a plan that changes the arithmetic completely.
The Great Program. A 45% expansion of the Russian peacetime army to 1,885,000 men by 1917.
Sitting in Berlin, that number isn't an army, it's a deadline.
Fear turns into a schedule at that point. If your enemy is unbeatable in 3 years, every year you wait is a year you lose, and the safest thing you can do becomes the most dangerous thing anyone can do.
There's one afternoon I keep coming back to on this, and I want to tell it properly rather than quote it.
The December meeting? Go.
8th of December 1912, a Sunday. The Kaiser calls in his senior military and naval people at short notice, and an admiral named George Alexander von Mueller writes the afternoon up in his diary that evening. A few pages, now in the Freiburg Military Archive. Moltke, the chief of the general staff, says the line everybody quotes, "I consider a war inevitable, the sooner the better."
Proof of what, though? Because I've seen that quote used to mean two opposite things.
Which is the argument? Moltke says the sooner the better, and then nothing follows. Fritz Fischer in 1961, and John Rohl after him, read that meeting as evidence of a German course toward war, deliberately timed for about 1914. That reading isn't fringe. It reshaped the whole field, and the strongest case against it sits in the same document. Mueller ends his own entry with 5 words. There were almost no results.
Tirpitz asks for a delay of about 18 months so the Navy is readier, which is not how anybody behaves at a meeting that has just decided something. Then Christopher Clark, in The Sleepwalkers, leaves the meeting out of his account of the crisis altogether, which is a position, not an oversight.
Then take the middle. Strong evidence of a mood, weak evidence of a decision.
Both of those can be true at once, and the people who insist on only one of them are usually arguing about 1960 rather than 1912. The Fischer debate was a fight about post-war German historiography before it was ever a fight about what happened in that room.
And the mood does not go away. In early June 1914, Moltke says it again in plainer language. If only things would finally boil over. We are ready, the sooner the better for us. So here's what I'd actually do with this, and the strongest objection goes first. The best scholarship says plainly that treating rival blocs as a major cause of the war misses the point. Alliances made nobody fire. Take that seriously and you still land here. Read the web as a transmission system, not a cause. It decided that a quarrel between 2 countries in the Balkans couldn't stay between 2 countries.
One sentence to carry out of here then. Take Article 2 of the 1892 Convention. Without previous agreement being necessary, somebody removed the step where a human being gets to think about it.
2 things worth keeping from the whole 43 years. The expiry in 90, that clause in
1990, you said 90. Even the dates want out of this decade.
1890, and I will finish it, because it's the payload. The lapse cost Germany the only wire holding Russia. The clause cost everybody the last moment where somebody could have stopped.
Nora Lewis, that's the pair I would keep. June 1914. 2 camps, one of them a contract and one of them a habit. Mobilization timetables that run themselves. a Balkan vacuum with two empires leaning into it, and a fatalistic officer class in Berlin watching a Russian clock.
Two armed camps, June 1914, all of it in place. And still, that June, no spark yet.
All it needed was a spark. The 37 days that followed it are episode 1.
Carry this home. The alliances didn't decide that there'd be a war. They decided that a war couldn't stay small.
Know somebody who still thinks 1914 was an accident? Send them Article 2. 4 lines, written 22 years early, and they delete the person who could have said wait.
If this is the kind of history you want, the source kind where we say out loud when a number couldn't be rechecked, subscribe. This is part 3 of 4, and the last one takes Germany from the armistice to 1933, and we couldn't settle this one between us today, so I am handing it to you. Was letting the Reinsurance Treaty lapse a blunder, or the honest choice? Thanks for spending 40 years of European diplomacy with us. Go read one of those treaties yourself. This is Kim, and I will see you at the Spark.